Spenser is best known for two works: The Faerie Queene, his epic romance, which was left unfinished at his death, but which had a tremendous influence on the course of English literature, and his shocking dialogue, A View of the Present State of Ireland, which is notorious for advocating the genocide of the Irish. Spenser was an important poet in early modern England and was well known in his time and had a tremendous influence afterwards. It was his death and the tomb made after he died in Westminster Abbey which set up Poets' Corner, which had become a staple feature of English life by the end of the 17th century, but wasn't until Spenser died, when he was buried next to Chaucer. So in many ways he created an image of a tradition of English literature. He had a great influence on the Gothic writers of the later 18th century who looked back to his work, thinking particularly about the supernatural and the strangeness of fairyland, a very important element of his writings. He had a great influence on the Romantic poets who often imitated his verse and also liked similar things in his writings, particularly William Blake, who looked back to Spenser for inspiration in both his art and his poetry. Spenser spent most of his life in London and in Ireland. He grew up in London, was born there, as he tells us in his poem The Prothalamion, and went to school there, was educated there before he went to Cambridge. And London had a great impact on his life. Its polyglot, cosmopolitan culture with a lot of immigrants were very important for him. In Ireland, he worked as a secretary for the Lord Deputy and acquired a lot of money and eventually an estate which enabled him to complete his writings later in his life. A manic burst of activity in the last 6 years, in the 6 years before he died, producing most of his famous works. Spenser's known for both tolerance and intolerance. On the one hand, he thinks very carefully about the ways in which different people should relate to each other in his works, and the ways in which different religions need to be thought about. In another way, he was known for his terrible intolerance, particularly his relationship to the Irish. And one of the things I want to recast in this biography is to think, how can such a man who seems humane and learned in many ways be so cruel and so appalling in other ways? But then he lives in a difficult and problematic age in which people were extreme in their views. In the end, I want to change the view of Spenser, who was last written about in terms of his biography in the late 1940s. He's been thought of as worthy but dull. But I want to show that he's one of the most exciting, challenging and confrontational writers in English literature.